Thank you everyone for bearing with me. I was running a little late from work and got stuck in a traffic jam, so. Okay. Okay. Amanda, are you able to see this?
Perfect. I can see it on my end.
Awesome. And then, do you know how to make this like bigger? Should I just zoom in?
Yeah.
Oh, there we go.
There we go.
Perfect.
All right.
Thank you.
You. Thanks for having us today.
All right. Hi, everyone. I'm Ruby. Um, I am a coach at Leland. I've been working with Leland for the last 2 years or so. And let me just see. Oh, here we go. Yeah, so this is my little intro slide. I went to the Harvard School of Dental Medicine. I graduated in 2023, so about a year ago. And since then, I've been working in private practice as a general dentist. I'm currently still living in Boston and I work in Lincoln, Rhode Island. So I do a little bit of a commute, which is hence why I was running a little late today. And I'm excited to be here with you guys today to answer any of your questions that you might have. So feel free to go ahead. You can either speak on, like unmute yourselves, or you can put it in the chat. Might be a little bit easier to put it in the chat just so people aren't talking over each other, but I will try to answer every single one. Okay. Any tips for international students regarding competitiveness or schools to apply to? So one thing I forgot to mention, I was and still am technically considered an international student. I'm Canadian, so when I applied as a Canadian as well. So all of the, difficulties that international students face, I did go through them. I would say in general, thankfully in dentistry, it's a little bit more forgiving than medicine. For international students, especially if you're Canadian, you will be a little bit like, it's still difficult, but you'll have it a little bit easier than you would if you were applying to medical school. In general, I would say when you're an international student applying to dental school, just make sure you're only applying to schools who actually have a history of taking international students. There's things you can research to look this up, but there is a high tendency for schools to say that they take international students or say that they take even out of state students, but when you look at their statistics, they really don't. So just do your research, make sure that you know the schools that you're applying to do take international students. And then I would say in general, as long as your GPA and DAT is at or higher than their, average DAT and GPA, you should be okay. Okay. Is a 3.5 GPA competitive? Absolutely. The average, I believe, for accepted students to dental schools is around a 3.4. So 3.5 is good. Again, just remember, you gotta set your expectations according to what schools you want to apply to. So certain schools, that GPA would not be competitive, but for a majority of schools, it would be. I submitted my application. When did I submit my application? When I was applying, I submitted my application in I would say like the second or third week of June. And then there was some last minute secondary applications that I submitted a little bit earlier than that. But in general, what I do recommend is that if you are able to apply within June or early July, then you're still considered early, so you should be good. When should one expect secondaries or interviews to come in? So secondaries, a lot of those are just available right when you actually do the application. So while you're filling it out on AdSAS, you will see a lot of your secondary applications right there. Some schools do not give secondary applications to anyone except those that they're interviewing. So for example, Harvard does that. So if you do get an interview at Harvard, you would then get their secondary applications. And then that's basically it. So I would say most secondaries, once you apply, a lot of schools will essentially email you right away if they have a separate secondary, or you will not get them until you get an interview. And as far as interviews goes, it really depends depending on when you applied. So I would say if you applied, relatively early, you will start most likely getting interview invites in mid to late July, and then you can get invites all the way up until February, even March. So just because you're not getting invites early does not mean you're not going to get any. Just keep that in mind. What made me choose Harvard over other dental schools? And what would you offer for tips for HSDM? So Harvard is one of the smallest, it is the smallest dental school in the United States. We only have about a 34-person class. I would say in general, HSDM, just like every other dental school, really looks for well-rounded applicants. I know there's like a common misconception that you have to have a lot of research to go to a school like Harvard or any of the Ivies. That's not true. Just being well-rounded, showing that you have had interest in a variety of different things, and mostly that you have an interest in community healthcare and, giving back to the community is what's really going to make you stand out in both applications to an Ivy League and then also applications to any dental schools. So I would say, make sure you try to nail your DAT, get as high of a score as you possibly can. And as long, keep your GPA as high as you can as well. And that would kind of be my main tips when applying to HSDM. And if you want to throw in, a little bit of the oral systemic link, that's a big thing Harvard's big on and a lot of dental schools are big on. So just really emphasizing that oral health is whole body health. And I chose Harvard personally over other dental schools. I was mostly between Harvard and the University of Michigan. I have family in Michigan, but I went to undergrad at UMass Amherst. So I'd been on the East Coast for a little while. I really, really love Boston and this area. So I knew I wanted to be here for dental school if I could be. And so, yeah, that was mostly why I chose HSDM. And when it comes to the clinical aspect of it, I really liked that at HSDM. I got to do a year of medical school. So the first year is all medicine. You do like no dentistry. And as someone who was interested in medicine before I was interested in dentistry, this was really appealing to me. So I felt like I could become a more holistic provider. So that was a big reason I chose Harvard. And then also the small class size really did appeal to me. It can be nerve-wracking to be in such a small class, but I do think that it was really, really great to learn in that sort of environment. Okay. Should you write a completely new personal statement as a reapplicant? Yes, you should. When you are reapplying, you want to change as much as you can about your application. Your personal statement is obviously going to have a lot of the similar bones that your first one did because it's like, you're writing about you, but you don't want the personal statement to be the same at all. So for sure, try to make it different. What extracurricular should I aim for as a high school student? If you're a high school student, just focus on getting into, a field you actually want to be in, a major you actually want to be in. Get yourself involved in things you want to be involved in. Don't just do things to check boxes off. Don't become a cookie cutter applicant. That's never something that anyone really would recommend. So get involved in things you're passionate about, and those should naturally lead you to a career choice such as dentistry. Does undergrad school rankings matter when it comes to applying to dental school? No, they do not matter. Just your GPA, DAT, again, you as like a well-rounded applicant. So I'm gonna stop answering some of these like extremely specific questions that I think would be better served for maybe like a one-on-one or like direct coaching, just because I want this to be best for the whole group. There is a mention of a post-bac program in here. If you're doing a post-bac program and thinking of retaking the DAT, I would definitely apply once you've completed the post-bac program and completed the retake of the DAT, so you're aware fully of like what kind of application you're putting forward. When should you request letters of recommendation from professors before applying? Should it be a couple of months prior? This is a really good question. Yes, it should be. So what I usually tell clients, and this is also what I did, when you are applying, you're going to be applying like say June 1. So if you're applying June 1, all of your application should be complete by then. So that means your letters of recommendation should also be by then. I always tell people I think it's a good ballpark to ask people in February or March, mostly February, if they would be okay with writing you a letter of recommendation. You're giving them more than enough time to consider it if they need to think about it or just to write it because professors get really busy. And then if and when they say yes, you can provide reminders every month. So in March, you can remind them. April, you can remind them. And then finally in May, you can be like, hey, the deadline is mid-May. So that's what I also always tell clients. Tell them 2 weeks earlier than when you actually plan to apply, because if they do end up needing more time, it shouldn't affect your overall application. So roughly, if you're applying in a cycle and applications are like due in June or they open in June, I would have asked professors by February just to give them enough time. The graduates of which dental school in the US will not be able to practice outside of their own province. You can practice anywhere with an American degree. It's just about getting a license for the state you're in. Do you think becoming a dental hygienist would strengthen my application? Absolutely. Um, that's direct dental education that you're receiving, a lot of it too. So yes, it would most definitely strengthen your application. High school volunteering and shadowing hours do not count when you're applying to dental school. What tips do you have for answering the question, why do you want to attend this dental school? This is a good question too. So there's kind of a rough outline that I usually give my clients, and also again one that I used myself. You always want to highlight an academic reason you're interested in the school, a clinical reason that you're interested in the school, and then also my favorite thing to throw in there is just a complete personal reason why you're interested in the school. So for example, when I was writing about like why Harvard, I talked about the small class size and the integration of medical learning. So that was my like academic one. For my clinical one, I again emphasized the really small class size and having like a lot of, professor help, whatever. And then my personal one was just that I really love Boston. I love being in a city with such an emphasis on sports, and it being so small. It feels very homey and welcoming. And that's kind of outline is what I did for any school that asked that. So I've had some clients of mine write about how, they, for example, want to go to a Boston school because Boston's a running city and they really love running, and that's something they're super interested in getting into more, stuff like that. Like throw in a personal touch there so you can make it, more unique. What schools did I apply or interview at? I applied to, I think like 10 or 12 schools, and I received interviews at all of them except one. And I got into every school I interviewed. I did end up turning down some interviews because I got some interviews post-December. It was almost 5 years ago at this point, so I don't remember exactly the whole list, but off the top of my head, Penn, Columbia, Harvard, Michigan, Case Western, Maryland, Temple, Nova Southeastern, and I believe those are the main ones I can think of right now. But I did a very focused application on schools that were only Canadian friendly with a couple of reach schools in there. So that's kind of how I approached it. What do you think some of the reasons are for some students who don't get accepted to dental school even though they have a good GPA? I would say, this is always like an unfortunate occurrence when this does happen. And if that student has gotten an interview in the past cycle and they did not get in, then honestly, it's usually comes down to the interview skills. So there might have been something that went wrong in the interview, or just maybe the student didn't articulate themselves appropriately in the interview. If a student has applied and got no interviews at all, then it really boils down to like there's something amiss in the application. So it could have been how something was written, or not enough emphasis was placed on extracurriculars or dental shadowing, or like maybe your personal statement just didn't portray a true interest in dentistry. Those can all be reasons, but ultimately sometimes it's also just bad luck. And it sucks when it's like that, but it's the truth. As more and more people start to apply to medical and dental school, the sheer number increase is causing more people to be likely to not get in. It's just becoming more competitive. So that's what I would say to that. A good method to narrow down your dental school list of where you want to apply, I would say, when I was deciding, and again, what I've done for clients is you want to make a list based off of schools that meet your requirements. So like schools that, you have their GPA, your DAT, whatever. You always want to have a group of reach schools, a group of, you know, at level schools, and a group of safety schools. Um, Always, always, always have safety schools. Even if you think you're the best applicant in the world, it doesn't matter. You should have safety schools. So those are schools that are well below your average DAT, your average GPA, and you'd feel pretty confident that you'd be able to get into them. The bulk of the schools you should be applying to are in that middle range that you're at level at, or just about at level at. And then of course, everyone should throw in some reach schools. As you're narrowing down, I think it's good to narrow down by, just going off of that, and then also off of location, and what school you really see yourself at. So like look up the schools, read about them, look at the area they're in. So for example, I forgot this was one of the schools. Detroit Mercy was a school I interviewed at and got it into. But personally, even though my family's in Michigan, I did not feel like I would have thrived in the environment of Detroit Mercy, the way the school was, the location of the school. I don't think I would have been happy. And that, it was something I wish I had known prior to applying. But Detroit Mercy was one of my safety schools. So it was a school that I knew was Canadian friendly, that I knew I had stats higher than. So I knew I had to apply to it. So you got to kind of pick and choose, but I think roughly it's always good to apply from anywhere from 8 to 12 schools. Are there any scholarship resources? Unfortunately, there really isn't. Some schools have individual personal scholarships that they offer their students. And of course, there's like the military scholarships that people do, and community service scholarships. But other than that, unfortunately, there's really not any other scholarship programs. What do schools look for in candidates to send an invite? So they look for, a student that, again, hits at or near their requirements, or has other things in their application in case their requirements don't hit, they make up for it. And really they're looking for someone who's well-rounded, who can really portray a true passion for dentistry. And it doesn't just feel like a cookie cutter applicant. It's not someone who just was like, okay, what are the minimum things, or what are the things everyone does that I did, and so I should get an interview to dental school. Like, you don't want to be that sort of applicant. So you want to have like your own flair to your application and have true passion. I know someone in the chat asked what my extracurriculars were. This is by no means like the only way to do it. My situation was unique. I was Canadian. I couldn't get a job because of my visa status. So, there was very little paid work I could do. I also decided to go into dentistry relatively later, so I was kind of playing catch up. So honestly, my extracurriculars were things that I was just genuinely interested in, which was like Big Brothers Big Sisters. I was a rape counselor advocate at my campus. I volunteered at local soup kitchens and stuff like that. And I also nannied. I was a nanny throughout college, and that was essentially like the bulk of my extracurriculars. I was in the honors college. I did some very, very mild, more so shadowing in a lab rather than actual research. I had nothing to show for it. But all of those extracurriculars, my only dental experience was literally 100 hours of shadowing my general dentist in the area. And then I had been to one impressions day at Tufts because I decided pretty late. So I was really nervous. I didn't think I would have enough dental experience on there. But when I decided to do dentistry, I truly, all of the things, all of the reasons I got involved in the extracurriculars I got involved in, I was able to bring reasonings from each one into my application and why dentistry would be a good fit for me. So a lot of mentorship, a lot of community health care, and giving back to the community. And those were kind of like my focuses. So even though, yeah, sure, my application didn't have the clearest dental related extracurriculars, I was still able to tie dentistry into them. I'm a non-traditional applicant with a long gap year since I completed my undergrad. What are some important factors I must address on my application? So some important factors when you've taken some time off is why in the time you've taken off, you've come to dentistry. Like you really want to answer that question. Why are you choosing to leave what you are doing right now and go back into dentistry? That's kind of the main thing you want to address. And then continue to do the, why dentistry is a good fit for you. How long did I study for the DAT and what resources did I use? I'm a huge proponent of DAT boot camp. I know I did work there back in the day. I don't anymore, but truly like they're the best resource out there. So I would say boot camp is all you really need. Make sure I believe I gave myself about 8 to 10 weeks when I was studying. I Additionally, originally planned to have 12 weeks. I kind of slacked off. I did it over Christmas break. I really ultimately ended up with 8 to 10 weeks of study time. I think 2 to 3 months is more than enough time for most people to study for the DAT. But again, you got to know yourself. You got to know your study habits. What works for me and what works for someone else doesn't necessarily have to be the same. Would you recommend a 7 or 8 year combined dentistry program or a 4+4 program? Um, yeah, I mean, if you know right out of high school you want to be a dentist and you can get into one of those programs, go for it. There's really no difference. How important is it to have a competitive TOEFL score? This is a good question because I do work with some non-traditional applicants as well. I would say it's not that important, but um, it's always better to err on the side of caution and to do really well on these exams and these tests because you don't want anything like that to hold you back. So I would say it's not that important to have a good TOEFL score, but I would really, really try to have a good TOEFL score. Do you recommend a PhD DMD program that you know of? No, I personally have really had no interest in research, so I can't necessarily speak to that. How would you prepare a tell me about yourself type of interview question? This is a good question as well. So every person that interviews you is going to be a little bit different. So I would say I usually treat this question almost like an elevator pitch. So you want to keep it short and sweet, a minute to 2 minutes. Run through, introduce yourself. Hi, I'm Rubee. I was born and raised in Montreal, Canada, and then I moved to Grand Rapids, Michigan when I was 14 years old. From there, I went to University of Massachusetts Amherst and now I'm applying to dental school. My time at UMass has been amazing. I got to make some of the best friends I have, and I really came to love the East Coast. My family's very important to me, and yada, yada, yada. Like you want to talk about very personal things. You don't want to go off on a tangent. You do not want to just start rattling on about like your extracurriculars or your research. Tell me about yourself is a very personal question. You want to keep it light and airy, but still hit the main points. So like while I was talking about UMass, I could have been like, I made great friends. I was able to also get involved in things that I was really passionate about, like being a rape counselor advocate and being part of Big Brothers Big Sisters. But more than anything, I just love the East Coast and I love being out here. And in my leisure time, I really enjoy running. So it's an honor to be in a city like Boston that's like the home of running and known for it. Something like that. You want to just keep it, you want to keep it very personal and not too serious. How did you prepare for interviews? So interviews for each school, once you have your first interview, you're going to feel a lot better. But the biggest thing I always say, no matter how many interviews you get, have your application printed out to whatever school. It can be that school, it can be a different school, and review your entire application before you go in for that interview. Even if you have back to back to back interviews, reread your entire application. The reason I say this is because you'd be surprised how many times you will forget how you wrote things or you will forget the way you articulated things. And sometimes interviewers will ask you questions to see, oh, like, is this person going to answer this question how they wrote? Like, are they going to describe this research opportunity they had, how they wrote about it? So it can be a way that interviewers actually fish out someone who might not be being honest. So always, always, always review. And beyond even a dishonest reason, it's also just good for you because you remember like, oh yeah, like I've done this, I've done that. Like there's all these things I can talk about. And then additionally, always research the school that you're interviewing at. Research, what the school's about, some extracurriculars of theirs you're interested in. And then just like the general area as well. Is it okay to reuse letters of recommendation from previous science professors once one has graduated? Yes, but just make sure that that professor is able to like resubmit it because you can't just submit the letter, they still have to resubmit it, but that's okay. Do you have to ask for a committee letter for a letter of recommendation? Most schools make it pretty clear to you. So like at UMass, we did have a committee letter and it was like automatic. Like when we were applying, we had to make sure we had the committee letter. So it's really school specific, but the schools do not reach out. You need to reach out. Who should write your letters of recommendation? This is a good question as well. So in general, certain schools have different requirements. Um, but I would say you need to have at least 2 to 3 science professors. I think it's 3. And then after that, I would aim for someone in an extracurricular that you do that you're really passionate about. And then the 5th person, if you even have a 5th person, can kind of follow suit. So when I applied, I had 3 science professors that wrote one for me. One of my Big Brothers Big Sisters head, and then the woman I nannied for wrote one for me because truly like nannying was something I did and spent a lot of time doing while I was in college. So I knew she could speak for me and speak for my character. So you can kind of pick and choose here, but just make sure you choose a professor who actually knows you and will write you at least somewhat of a strong letter of recommendation. I can't even tell you how many times we've gotten letters of recommendations back, and you can tell that the I've literally read letter applications with letters of recommendation that are like 2 sentences long. So, just make sure you trust the person that's doing it for you, and that they actually know you. Does interviewing in person boost your application or does online interview not make a difference? This is a tough question because as much as I would, I think schools really try to not favor in-person interviews over online. I think it's a natural occurrence. So if you're able and willing to do an in-person interview, I always strongly recommend it. You can portray body language and everything like that a lot better in person than you can online. But obviously, if there's like limiting factors and you're not able to do it, no, like it's not going to hinder your application that much. How did I manage finances and tuition as an international student? Thankfully, I went to a dental school that had its own credit union, not like Harvard Dental itself, but Harvard University. So I actually received a private loan for my tuition only through them. Unfortunately, there was like a cap on the what I could get, so I could only do tuition. And I'm very grateful my family was able to help me with my cost of living. But overall, there's lots of different options out there. I would strongly suggest if you don't have a credit union attached to your school that offers loaning, to go through other credit unions. Private lenders can be a very slippery slope. So the name of the game is just to try to get the lowest interest rate you can. And if you're Canadian, go for the Canadian loans. The Canadian loans are the best loans you can get. It's a pain in the ass to try to get them, but if you're Canadian, go for the Canadian doctor loans. What is the attitude towards Harvard Dental, towards applicants with families? So I actually, in my class, one of my classmates had two daughters coming in and then had two more kids through dental school. So no, it's not frowned upon at all. Every year, I think there was at least a few students or at least one. I mean, and remember, there's only a class of 34. It's very small, that had families and multiple students that were married. So no, it's not frowned upon at all. I think that it's tricky, especially as a woman. Like I know one of my friends, when she was interviewing, she was actually actively pregnant and she felt like she had to kind of hide her pregnancy. But overall, I would say that schools really don't let that affect their decision. As far as I know, and I would hope that this is not me just being naive, but from what I've seen, there's always an even distribution. Is it not a good idea to get a letter of recommendation from a professor whose course was online? I would not go for an online professor if you can avoid it. If that person is someone that you built a genuine good relationship with and you feel like they could write you a strong letter of recommendation, it does not matter if it's online. You can go for it. But if you can avoid it, try to avoid it. How can you stand out as a low stat applicant? When you have low statistics, everything is your extracurriculars and how you've gotten involved. So you need to try to find extracurriculars that you are passionate about and that you are uniquely interested in. They don't have to be crazy unique, but they have to be something that you're truly interested in so that it transfers to when you're writing your application. And then if you're like truly a very low low statistic applicant, then I would consider potentially doing a post-bac program, just to raise your GPA so you have a higher chance of admission. Oh, here's another UMass student. Yeah, go Minutemen. How to explain pass fail for prerequisite class or go taken during COVID in my case, which is too late to revoke for the letter grade. I would So when you're applying in the application, you can always send an addendum to each school. So you can send an additional like little piece of info that if you couldn't put it on your application. But there's a section where you can explain something in your application that you didn't have a chance to explain, and I would just explain it in there. And I would for sure just emphasize the fact that you were going through a lot of difficult changes and obviously there was a global pandemic going on and you were just thought it would be better to take a class for pass fail credit because of personal stressors. And as long as like the rest of your science classes have been good grades, like you should be fine. Having a minor in art stand out as an applicant? Absolutely. What is the difference between post-bac and masters, which is better for dental school? So usually post-bacs, it depends. Every school is a little different, but like usually post-bacs are fully geared towards preparing you for dental school. Whereas a master's, it's like it is its own curriculum and can also still prepare you for dental school. I don't think either or is better or worse, but like a lot of post-bac programs have relationships with dental schools that they can kind of that they can help their students get into. So to contact me in the future, you can just find me on Leland. And I believe we're almost out of time, but how do you address a course with a low grade during an interview? That's a good question. So if you have anything on your application, whether it's a low grade or it's something that you're just like nervous about addressing, like maybe you got in trouble or something, it's always better to be honest and upfront. So if for example, interviewer asks you, tell me a time that you failed. If I were you, and if I was the interviewer or the interviewee, I would likely bring up that time and try to explain it in a way that shows that I've grown both personally and academically. So if you have a course with a low grade, you can discuss how, you really struggled. You did a lot of what you thought was helpful. Maybe you went to office hours, you did this, you did that. And it was very difficult for you to still not succeed. But from there, you learned XYZ. So you learned coping mechanisms, you learned ways to do better next time. So I would try to phrase it at some point in your interview as something that you got over and that you learned a lot from. So it spins a negative into a positive. So do you just write positive things in your statement of purpose? So like in your personal statement? Yes. Yeah. Just try to write positive things. Your personal statement is not a place to try to hash out things that are wrong with you or your application. There can be like sly mentions of things. So for example, like when I was applying, I was advised to not tell anyone that I was international, and I just like simply thought that was crazy because I was like, you can just look at my application and know I'm international. So I like brought that up in my interview or in my personal statement. And I also directly discussed how I clearly transitioned relatively late to dentistry because that was truly like a part of my journey. But I didn't address it in a negative way. I just was like, this is XYZ, like this is what happened, and that's it. Like, um, when they ask why, so this again is getting more specific. So guys, try your best not to ask very specific questions, just because this is for, the best of the group. But for international students or international dentists that are applying to advanced standing programs, the personal statement or the statement of purpose will ask why the United States. So you really should mention, maybe the innovation and technology, potentially compare the way the delivery of care is in your home country versus in the US and what you like better about the American way of doing things. Essentially, you just really have to kiss up to the American way of doing things if you're writing that application, whether you believe it or not. Is it not a positive thing anymore to mention in the personal statement if my parents are dentists? Um, that's that I'm not so sure on. If you're mentioning it in a way that's like it truly is a part of your journey to dentistry, then it's absolutely okay. But if you're mentioning it in a way of like, which obviously I'm sure you're not going to, but if you're mentioning it in a way of like, oh well, my parents are dentists, and so therefore I should be a dentist, like, don't do that. But if it's a part of like your true journey, then there's nothing wrong with that. Um, I don't necessarily think that it's a negative thing. I think that it just tends to paint certain people in a light of like, okay, this person is just trying to do do it because it's already in their family and they're not truly passionate about it. So personally, I probably wouldn't mention that my parents were dentists in my personal statement. You're going to have to mention their occupation in your application in general. There's a section for it, but I wouldn't highlight it in my personal statement. What are things you can do to stand out as an applicant? So as I've already addressed a few times, really just get involved in the things that you are interested in, that you're truly interested in terms of extracurriculars. So community outreach, volunteer groups, or even research organizations, or anything that you are truly interested in. It doesn't have to be purely dentistry related. It's something that you are passionate about, and you will be able to find a connection to dentistry as a result. Okay, so that brings us to the end, essentially, of our question and answer session. So here is a link to contact me directly. There are so many amazing coaches on the Leland profile that work with students specifically for dentistry related things. I'm more than open to take on more clients, but just full disclosure, I am a full-time dentist, so I do more limited consulting work now, and this is more of just like a mentorship passion thing for me. So please definitely reach out to any of the other coaches on Leland if you need any guidance in your application process, and I wish all of you guys best of luck.